There are lots of misconceptions about eating disorders, but I would say that one of the most significant ones that interferes with diagnosis is that that eating disorders are easily recognizable, easily identifiable just by looking. People assume that anorexics are skinny and that people who are binge eaters are fat, and that is not the case at all. In fact, weight and malnutrition are only a couple of the many components that make up these complex disorders. And in fact, many anorexics are of normal weight. And as for binge eaters, because they typically starve or restrict food for days at a time following binge episodes, their weight remains in the normal range very typically. And it's very important for therapists to understand that 60%, fully 60% of eating disorders go undiagnosed. So it's so important to be able to recognize what it is that really points to the existence of pathology. Another common misconception that is very debilitating for people who want to recover is that people believe that eating disorders, like addictions, are chronic lifetime disorders. They believe that once eating disorders, always eating disorders. And in actual fact, that's not true at all, because eating disorders are fully and completely curable in 80% of cases when treated in a timely and effective manner. And lastly, there's one more misconception that I think really needs to be discussed, and that is that eating disorders are essentially about food and weight. And certainly food and weight are a significant part of how these disorders manifest themselves. But eating disorders are essentially disorders of the self that has been fragmented by this disease. These are disorders of self-perception, self-regulation, self-esteem. And with recovery comes restoration of the core self, of self-trust, of self-control, of self-reliance, and of the capacity for self-care. Can't imagine any kind of work that would be more gratifying, because eating disorders essentially steal away the very life of a person, the life and the personality. It separates the person from himself or herself, and it separates children from their families. Eating disorder recovery actually recovers the lost self. It reunites the whole person together in a newly grounded and functional way, and in a way that invariably is better than when a person first began and prior to the eating disorder. So parents end up getting their kids back. The patients end up getting their lives and personality back. And it's always of an improved version. And what's interesting is that invariably recovered patients will express gratitude for having suffered this disease, for the opportunity it has provided them through treatment to come back to themselves in a way that leaves them so much better off than they were when they started. So eating disorder recovery growth represents the start and the continuation of a lifelong process of growth and maturation. I would say that for people who have a healthy relationship with food, first and foremost, they probably do not have a genetic propensity or susceptibility to develop an eating disorder. And it's important to note that eating disorders, the origin of them lies very clearly in brain chemistry and in genetics. But also, in terms of traits that people do have, I would say that these people have the courage and the capacity to face themselves and to really know themselves, to recognize their feelings, and with that, to understand their needs, and to have the wherewithal to get their needs met in a constructive way. I think people need to have an understanding, just a cognitive reality kind of understanding of what healthy eating actually is, bypassing some more common misconceptions about eating disorders and about healthy eating. Now, the most common ones are that healthy eating is fat-free eating or sugar-free eating, that it's eating only when you're hungry, not at mealtime, and that it's about dieting, or oftentimes people just regard food as being fattening, and when they ingest it, they end up feeling guilty. So these are based on lots of misconceptions. And what people who are healthy eaters have to remember is that, and probably for the most part, they do know that food is meant to nourish the body, to feed the brain, to satiate hunger, and to enhance sociability. And a healthy relationship with food requires the ability to differentiate hunger cues from emotional cues. And that is very important. For emotional eaters, people are eating because of their feelings, not because of the body's needs. And lastly, I would say that another important trait of healthy eaters would be emotional and behavioral flexibility, with the capacity to regulate their eating behaviors, to be flexible about them, not to always be rigid about what they will allow themselves and what they won't allow themselves. And what's interesting is that people who are capable of eating with moderation and balance are generally able to conduct themselves pretty well with moderation and balance in other life spheres as well, even beyond food and eating. And so when we understand that, we can see that eating disorder recovery leads to a healthier lifestyle in general, healthier behaviors in all areas of life.